I have a couple of really busy days coming up. I've been trying to get the pasture reseeded, and all of the horses are getting their teeth done in a few days. All of the horses out on pasture have been out pretty much since November, so I need to catch them up and make sure they're not going to be too wild. In the wintertime, these guys just stay out in the pasture and I come out and brush them and pick their feet. The ones that need to get trimmed over winter, like Stewie, Goose, and Pete, come in to get their feet trimmed a few times. The rest of the horses are actually self-trimming for the winter, so their feet don't grow fast enough for them to need to be trimmed. Since Stewie was really wanting to come out, he is going to be the first one that I work with today. Since it's a pretty nice day out, I am just going to tie him to the trailer. It looks like he is not quite ready to shed out yet. A lot of you guys have been asking me why I don't talk into the camera. And I am just super clumsy. I also prefer the focus be on all of the horses. I am pretty sure if I tried to walk around and talk to the camera and do things with the horses that I would injure myself pretty quickly. So for now, I am just gonna stick to doing it this way. Stewie wasn't too disgusting today. A lot of the mud has dried up around their dry lot, so they're relatively clean. Since we have been having on and off blizzards, I haven't had a chance to give them their spring baths yet. Here, I'm just checking his back. I'm going to see kind of where everybody is at today when I bring them in. Some of them do get a little bit sore standing around all winter. And it looks like Stewie did find a little puddle to lay in. I think it'll be really interesting for you guys to see the difference between all of the horses when I bring each of them in today and brush them up and pick out their feet. Stewie is just a really laid back, easygoing kind of guy. I'd like to think it has something to do with my horse training abilities because I am the only one that's ever taught him anything. But he is a pretty calm-minded horse in general. He is also super curious, so that makes him really easy to train. I was trying to find a pair of scissors I thought I had in here, but I am not seeing them. I definitely need to clean out this tack room pretty soon. I was going to show you guys the inside, but it is pretty embarrassing right now. I have way too many saddles in here. I also have a little sleeping setup in there, even though it's not a living quarters. I did find a pair of clippers that I decided to use to trim all these horses' tails with. I don't think I've actually used clippers on any of these horses. I don't generally ever trim their whiskers or their ear hair or anything like that. So this is the first time Stewie is seeing these. He is not scared of them one bit. He wants to have a little snack on them. But this is one of the main reasons that I like my horses to be very curious and outgoing. This level of confidence really helps them explore new things instead of being scared of everything all the time. Stewie does have a little sarcoid on his eyelid. He has had it since I bought him, and I have tried to get it to disappear a few times, but every time I put any cream or ointment on it, it just flares up. Sometimes it's just best to leave those things alone, so that's what I'm doing with that for now. He doesn't have any other ones on his body, so as long as it stays the same, I am not going to touch it anymore. Little Gus was ready to come in as soon as I went out to the pasture again. I still need to make a video on how I got little Gus, but his story is very similar to Goose and Pete's. He has changed a lot since I bought him a few years ago. In addition to some training problems, he also had a few medical issues that I had to deal with. He was actually a really tough nut to crack, but he is one of my favorites now. He reminds me a lot of Frisco Bill. He's very independent and a little bit sassy. He is not scared of very much, but he does get really defensive sometimes. When he finally ended up in the loose sale, he had been through 3 other homes in the same year I bought him. I think his story is probably very similar to a lot of horses that get traded around for training or medical issues that go on unresolved for quite a while. Compared to Goose and Pete, he is really laid back, but he does have some pretty explosive maneuvers when things are not quite right with him. One of the things that I deal with him pretty often is him having a sore back. He is a very high-strung horse, so he does spend a lot of time walking the fence now and then. It seems to get worse in the springtime because he really does like to have a job. It looks like his back is a little bit sore right now. He is one that I have to spend the proper amount of time legging up and making sure all of his muscles are relaxed. If I throw a saddle on him and expect to ride him in the same day, then he is definitely going to have something to say about it. Now that he's all brushed up, I am going to trim his tail too. Just a quick introduction to the sound that the clippers are making. He doesn't seem to mind at all either. I cannot believe how much these horses' tails grew over the winter. Most of them are dragging on the ground, and I cut them pretty short when I trimmed them up in November before all of the snow came. You can see how long his tail is right here. He's got a few little mud balls stuck on it too. I like to trim it up to right at the top of their fetlock. That seems to be the best length to keep it at so they don't step on it if they back up. I bet his tail has grown 4 or 5 inches over the winter, which is nuts. These guys don't get any special supplements for hair growth or anything like that, but their regular nutrition covers pretty much everything, so it allows their hair to grow pretty fast, I think. Little Gus also has kind of an immature mind. He also sometimes still has trouble with me touching his ears. He was one that I'm pretty sure was eared down a bunch of times in his life. Compared to how he was when I got him, he is much better. But that is something that I'm constantly working on with him, just so he knows I'm never going to twist his ears. It sounds like Pete is not happy about what's going on today. Little Gus does tie very well, so I'm going to hard tie him today, even though he hasn't been tied up in quite a long time. I have a feeling that Pete is going to be the last one that wants to get caught up today. Sometimes in the spring, him and Big Gus will run around and not want me to catch them, but they have gotten a lot better over the years. I thought I might be able to convince Pete to come in with me and Gus, but he was keeping his distance for now. These two boys are pretty close. It is interesting to see how they behave when they're separated. Sometimes I put Pete in the barn during the spring and leave Gus turned out. The herd dynamics do shift a little bit, and it's pretty interesting to watch. Now, I know this has been confusing a few of you guys that I have 2 horses named Gus. This is Big Gus, or sometimes I call him Gus Gus or Gussie. I bought him as an unstarted 3-year-old, and I did name him Gus. It really suits him. And then a few years later, I bought Little Gus, and Little Gus is about 14 hands maybe. Big Gus is around 15-1, I'd say.
Skeletor.
I heard this really weird noise, and of course it was Skeletor. He was in his run picking up the rocks and tossing them around.
You chewing on this rock?
He is really starting to get tired of being in his stall with the run all the time.
Oh, no, Skelly.
These boys look like they are behaving themselves really well. One of the most important things I teach these horses is how to stand tied. It is something that people make a really big deal out and can get kind of hairy. I think a lot of people make the mistake of tying a horse up one day and just leaving them tied until they understand that that's what they're supposed to do, but I have found that that doesn't work very well. I have a whole process that I go through, and I am planning on doing a video of that with Scarlett. Scarlett does know how to ground tie, but I've not taught her how to hard tie yet. She is getting pretty bored, so I'm going to have to start working her soon. Gus always looks a little bit ratty coming out of winter. He is pretty sensitive to the spring grass, so it takes me a while to get him ready to go out on pasture, but once he's out on full pasture, he will look so much better. Compared to the other horses, his hair is just really, really coarse. And he does usually take the longest to shed out in the spring. He is a little bit of a funny horse. He does not like to get in trouble for anything. I'm not really sure if he even likes people at all. He is really a no nonsense kind of guy. He just always does what he's told and listens really well. Sometimes coming out of winter, he has trouble being tied up. I actually got him delivered by his breeder, and when they dropped him off, he was actually down in the trailer tied up. So I think that has a lot to do with his problems of being tied now. He hasn't pulled back in a very long time, but when he does not mess around. I use the little blocker rings, especially on my trailer when it's not hooked up to my truck. If the horses get scared or in a bind, they can pull through the ring and not feel so claustrophobic. Gus is another horse that did have his legs roped before I got him. He was a little bit tricky for me to teach how to have his feet handled. He was just very nervous about it all the time. Now he almost always lifts up his legs for me because he understands what I'm asking him, which is really interesting because he was not very good for the farrier when I did have a farrier come out and do him. He just gets very nervous that he might get in trouble. He is a completely different horse if you handle him
Stewie?
aggressively. I think Stewie is
Stu?
more than ready to go back to work. The other horses have grown pretty tired of his shenanigans throughout the winter, I've noticed. I even saw Pete chasing him around the other day, so it'll be a good time for them all to go back into work. We are going to get some more storms in the next couple of days, and I'm
Pete.
hoping to sneak out into the
Come on,
pasture
Pete.
and overseed it. Tomorrow is supposed to be pretty windy, like 25-mile-an-hour winds, so I won't get it done then, but hopefully before these guys get their teeth floated, I will be able to get out there and lay some seed
Come
down.
in.
I was pretty surprised that Pete was waiting for me at the gate. Generally, the first time I bring him in for the spring, he gives me a little bit of the runaround when I go out to catch him. He is one that I can't put his halter on right away. I usually have to use a neck rope and then put the halter on, and he's totally fine. Out of all of the horses I have, Pete is definitely the most worried all of the time. I think you'll be able to tell as I'm brushing him what I'm talking about. His baseline is kind of a little bit scared all the time. You could see there he spooked at a gopher that was on the ground. Even things that he's seen and done before sometimes give him a little bit of a startle. Because he's always kind of in a state of high alert, you can see exactly when he relaxes. So as I brush him, you can see when he is a little bit nervous about things. Right there, he had a little bit of a nervous twitch. And he did it again there when I just put my hand on him. You can't really see it from the video, but the whole time I'm brushing him, he is squeezing his little mouth shut and he is a little bit worried around his eyeballs. When I come over to his left side, which is his better side, he finally starts to relax. You can see him licking his lips right there. I did not give him a treat or anything. That is just him becoming more relaxed. I think it is probably one of the most misunderstood concepts in horse training. Many people say when a horse starts licking and chewing that they are understanding a concept, but it is actually a lot more simple than that. When horses are in a state of stress, they will switch into that fight or flight mode. And it doesn't look like Pete is particularly stressed, but he operates at a low level of stress pretty much all the time. When he is finally able to relax and his parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, he will start licking and chewing. And that is just due to the fact that when they are in flight or fight mode, their mouth gets extremely dry. Once they are in a more relaxed state, The saliva returns to their mouth and they start automatically licking and chewing. This is one thing that I wish more people actually understood. You can chase a horse in a round pen for 10 to 15 minutes and they will almost always lick and chew at the end of it. That does not necessarily mean that they learned anything or they are accepting any kind of training concept. Dr. Sue McDonald probably has the best explanation of why horses lick and chew. I will find it and link it in the description for anybody that is interested in learning more about that. As I go along with Pete today, you'll actually be able to notice that he goes back into a little bit of a fight or flight mode several times. One is here when I start trying to pick up his feet. He usually only does this if he's sat for a long time and I haven't handled his feet in a while. You can see there he gained some relief and started licking and chewing again. He does have scars on all of his legs from where he was roped before I got him. So it is pretty understandable that he can still have times where he is not 100% comfortable with me handling his feet. I often give him just a minute or two to calm down and then I come back and ask him again. He is one that will pull back if he gets overly stimulated, so I decided to untie him since he was taking a little bit longer than I had expected to calm down. This is something that could escalate very quickly if I didn't acknowledge that he was having some trouble. Some people may think it's silly because I have had him for quite a number of years now. I just don't get too upset about it because I know that this is something he really has trouble with. I make sure to give him the time he needs to calm down and start to become a little bit curious, which doesn't really take that long. I probably only had to spend maybe 5 extra minutes on him compared to the other horses. He is another one that, depending on the day, had a really hard time letting the farrier handle his feet. I really try and set these horses up for success so they don't have any real explosive moments. Just a few extra minutes to make sure he'll stand still when I go to pick up his feet really pays off in the long run. When I got Pete, this leg was the one that had a rope burn almost all the way down to the bone on it, so sometimes this can be the trickiest foot to pick up. As long as I take my time and let him kind of settle into it, we don't have any problems. But you can see that he is a little bit stressed in his eyeballs now. He does have a lot of unnecessary worry. But for the very first day in from the pasture this spring, this was no big deal.
Nigel.
Nigel was really staring me down while I was grooming the other horses. I didn't have enough of the blocker rings over there, and Pete definitely needs to be tied with one. He hard ties perfectly 95% of the time, and the other 5% he is extremely explosive. Tiny finally came out from her little nap atop the hay pile. Since Stewie is standing pretty well, I decided to put Pete in his spot and then I'll move Stewie over and hard tie him somewhere. Pete does know how to hard tie, but when he gets scared, he will try and run away and does pull back. I don't think it is anything that I'm going to be able to train out of him, so I always use a blocker ring when I tie him now. He has actually gone back into a state of a little bit of stress. It is a little bit easier to see when you look at Pete next to Gus and little Gus and Stewie. He is just fidgeting a little bit more and not really relaxed. The rest of the horses are kind of taking naps. You can see there that Pete decided that this isn't going to be a stressful thing for him. I still have probably half an hour before I have to feed, so I am going to catch Whiplash and Goose. I do still have to do a video on Whiplash. He is probably the fanciest horse I have in the barn. These two boys have been out all winter. When I trim them, I just take them into their little run-in shed. Whiplash can have some serious separation anxiety from Goose. I have had both of them turned out with a bigger herd before, but they just get along much better when they are by themselves. Whiplash was a pasture pet for all of his life before I got him. Sometimes he still gets nervous, tied up, or when he's away from the other horses. He doesn't do anything dangerous ever, and he is a very outgoing and curious horse, so he is not too bad to handle. He is related to Frisco Bill, and they are very similar in a lot of aspects. They are about the same size, and they have the same kind of personality. I am really interested to see what this dentist says about his teeth. He had not had any dental care until I bought him, so he has some pretty big abnormalities that are being fixed little bits at a time. He had a really significant wave in his incisors, which is pretty hard to get. It is also a little bit tricky to fix because you can't reduce the incisors very much at once. So it usually takes multiple visits to get it as good as possible. It looks like he is starting to let go of his winter coat a little bit. I still am not trying very hard to shed him out. I'm just brushing them with this curry comb today because it's the easiest to get the mud off with. I am pretty excited that I haven't seen any fungus on these guys. Because of how the snow melts and how muddy it is for a few weeks, these guys just lay down and roll, and it's really, really hard to keep them clean. A lot of the times they'll end up getting little spots of ringworm here and there that need to be treated when I give them their first bath. I keep an eye on it pretty closely, and it typically goes away very quickly. And I'm not talking about fungus all over their bodies, maybe just 2 or 3 little spots on each of the horses. Some of them don't get it at all. Whiplash usually has a little bit of a sore back too. It looks like he has a little bit of crusties right along his spine. Not a big deal, but something that I'll take an extra close look at when I give him a bath, hopefully pretty soon. He was curious about the clippers and didn't care too much about them. His tail is looking a little sparse, so I bet he was backing up on it and pulling some of it out. He was a little bit squirmy, but he just doesn't like standing still a lot of the time. Even though his feet haven't been trimmed since about November, they still look really, really good. He wears them down on the ice and snow as fast as they grow, so they look about like they did when I trimmed them last. Even though Whiplash was a pasture puff before I got him, he did have pretty good ground manners. I think that it's fine to have a horse that you don't ride, but you need to be able to handle them so you can meet their basic needs like trimming their feet and having the vet come out and look at them. It looks like all of the boys are behaving really well. I am a little bit surprised none of them are wiggling around or trying to escape. But all of these boys have played this game before. They know what I expect of them. Pete is still a little bit wiggly, but not too bad. Little Gus and Gus are just taking naps standing at the tie rail. I do think that I'm probably going to have a little bit of trouble with Whiplash because he is over by himself. He still gets upset sometimes that I make him stand tied. He will usually paw for a few minutes while I'm still watching him, but he'll stop when I leave. Sometimes I notice that Stewie also will start pawing if Whiplash is tied in the same pen with him. The last one that I have to catch up today is Goose.
So,
I really wanted to show you how I have to halter him because it's a little bit weird, but I was having some camera difficulties. Goose can be a little bit on the snorty side when I bring him in for the first time. It looks like Scarlett is really interested in what Whiplash is doing. I did get a comment on one of my videos about how I'm not supposed to be feeding these horses treats from my hands. The majority of horses that I work with have a very low fear threshold and high flight response. Basically, they are just very easily scared of things that other horses are not. One of the main tools I use to help reduce their fear, anxiety, and stress is to replace a stressful situation with a pleasant situation. And since these horses do not like to be pet on or scratched, typically a food reward is about the only way that I have to make that happen. So it's a lot different than clicker training or positive reinforcement. I am not expecting them to do a task for the treat or act in a certain way. I am not bribing them or frivolously feeding them treats over and over again for no reason. There is a definite method to my madness. I very rarely give Skeletor treats when we're just doing regular things. He might get one in the trailer from time to time if he's a little bit nervous, but other than that, he is far too outgoing and brave for me to use any treats with him. The same goes for Stewie and Prim. They are all very brave on their own and they don't get nervous in new situations very often, so I hardly ever give them treats. Whiplash doesn't seem to be doing too bad tied up. He's pawing a tiny little bit. It does look like Goose is probably ready to shed out. He is a little bit fatter than the rest of the horses, so that makes some sense. I kind of wish all these guys would shed out at the same time so I didn't have to be covered in hair for weeks and weeks.
Why, Goosey?
Goose is being a pretty good boy. Sometimes he can get nervous when I walk behind him still. For him, I probably should switch to a lower calorie treat since he is getting a little bit on the fat side. He is one that I should probably put on grass hay, but it's just so hard for me to get out here. I think if any of the horses were going to have a problem with these clippers, it would be Goose. Since he is so sensitive, I decided that it would probably be enough for him to touch my hand while the clippers were on top of them. Hopefully you can see how nervous he is compared to the other horses. And I'm just going to give him a little treat so he thinks that this is a really cool activity for us to do. He is a little bit braver and less snorty that time. Some could say that this is positive reinforcement, but I'm not asking him to do any task other than stand still and not be scared. The third time I show him the clippers, he is more interested than the first two and he goes back in for a second sniff. I go ahead and give him another little treat. That extra 2-minute introduction to the clippers allowed me to be a little bit more safe when I go to trim his tail. Since he can be a little bit wiggly around his rear end, I think it was important to go ahead and do that today. I am pretty sure that if I had started in and just grabbed his tail and went to go trim it, he would have freaked out. And you can tell he is still a little bit unsure about what I'm doing back here. Right there, you can see that he finally starts to relax a little bit. And then he does a little bit more of the licking and chewing. He is kind of going back and forth between a little bit scared and a little bit relaxed. So he is really using his little horse brain here. In the end, I give him another little treat because he was still quite a bit nervous for that. When I went to go pick up his feet, he was being a little bit weird, so I just moved him forward a few steps to kind of reset his brain. I think he was still a little bit nervous I was going to get my clippers out again. But once he understood I was just picking up his feet, he was totally fine. It does look like Whiplash did a little bit more pawing than I had thought. Hopefully with Goose next to him, he will calm down a little bit now. If these horses ever start pawing, I usually won't untie them and put them back until they're
Stewie.
standing quiet. I think Stewie's just trying to get my attention because he wants his dinner, but he's going to have to stand there while I clean the stalls. I did want to show you guys how dark Prim is getting while she's shedding out a little bit of her winter coat. She changes colors almost every season, and I'm really excited to see what color she turns this year. I love this really dark dappled buckskin, so I hope that is the final color. Her mane is also finally starting to grow back. I really hope she doesn't rub it out again this spring. I cleaned a few stalls and came out to check on these boys. They were all being very well behaved. Nobody was pawing, and they were just standing quietly waiting for me to be done with the chores for the evening. Skeletor has been wasting mountains of hay, so I cleaned out his stall and I'm gonna go put it out for these boys. They'll definitely eat it. I am just gonna put it right in their pasture. It is pretty dry, so I'm just gonna put it right on the ground. I was gonna bring some feeders out here, but it is almost all the way dry again. I really try to avoid any extra work when I can because I do have a lot to do every day. I have been using hay nets when the weather is nasty just to keep all of their hay together and up off the mud. I have no idea how they managed to do this. Gus will sometimes play with these and sling them around, and it looks like it got stuck on the fence. I am just going to go through and pick up all the ones that are still out here from this morning. I'm surprised they drank so much water, but I think with the last couple of days being a little bit on the nicer side, they have been running around their dry lot quite a bit. Somebody asked me why I lock them in this mud hole, and it is so that the pasture grows properly. I would say the majority of places that have pastures out here also have a dry lot that the horses can spend time in. This one is relatively big, and it is definitely enough room for the 4 horses that are in here. They can run around and play and stretch their legs, and they can get some exercise. With the grass starting to come up, the gophers are out and about, and so is Tiny. She was pretty excited to see me tonight while she was out mousing. She looks like she is super excited about all the gopher activity that is going on this evening. She is a pretty small cat. I think she's only 5 pounds. It looks like I have about ran out of time for the day, so I am going to go finish up a few more chores and then go get these horses turned back out. I think that Scarlett was a little bit upset she wasn't part of the activities this evening. Since all of these boys were being pretty well behaved, I am going to take them back out to the pasture 2 at a time. They definitely look like they are ready for their dinner. Even though they've seen me take out a few carts of hay to their pasture, they are all still standing very well. I do like these tie back rings, but you do have to be careful with your fingers if you're untying a horse that does pull back. I did see a guy lose a finger that way once. This will be a pretty good test of these horses' manners. They did see me put big piles of hay out here, and I think they're pretty excited to get out and eat them. I do not like it when my horses run away after I take their halters off, so they need to stand quiet until I let them go. Stewie did pretty good, but then Pete got a little bit scared. I'm just going to walk him around a little bit and close the gate so he doesn't escape. When I take his halter off, I am just going to drop it over his nose and then wait with the rope around his neck until he stands still and then let him go. It looks like Stewie's ready to play and test out every single pile of hay that I put out. I am pretty excited to finally be able to start him under saddle. Next, I brought back little Gus and Gus as well. And these boys were a little bit saucy. Gus always gets a little bit snorty if he thinks he might get in trouble. I am going to let little Gus go first because I think I'm going to have to stand here with Big Gus for a while until he calms down. That was definitely not good manners on little Gus's part. I am going to make Gus stand for a moment because he is a little bit riled up. He is ready to get to his dinner. I gave him a few little scratches, and now I'm just going to take his halter off and have him stand still for a little bit. These little tiny things that take just a few extra seconds really make a big difference. Next, I'm going to turn out Whiplash and Goose. It looks like I probably should have cut Goose's tail a little bit shorter because it is still dragging on the ground, which is a little bit wild because I did cut off like 5 inches from his tail. All of the ice in this dry lot is finally melting, so this one is still a little bit muddy. We are supposed to be getting some weather in the 60s next week, so that should be the perfect time to get these dried out and get the horses some baths. Goose can still be a little bit weird about getting his halter off. So when he's done, I will probably give him the last treat I have in my pocket. And it looks like Whiplash is not happy about that.
Come on, Teddy.
It looks like Tiny was pushing her luck a little bit in with Whiplash and Goose. After bringing in all of the horses today, I feel a lot better that they are going to be well behaved for when the vet is here to do their teeth in a few days. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.